All right. Yeah, so my name is Nate, and I am a member of the UCLA UAM chapter. And today we are going to be going over how to navigate research in the face of the federal funding cuts and what the future holds for publicly funded research programs. And so we have with us Patrick Dexter with United Auto Workers, Peter Mayroddick with Public Citizens Access to Medicine Group, and Dr. Sydney Campbell from the Biological Chemistry Department at UCLA. But yeah, and then Mona can go over that a bit more.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I will be helping moderate the panel. I just wanted to thank you all for being here and help kick off the session. This one is called Restoring Research, How You Can Fight Funding Cuts and Support the Future of Science. As you guys all know, the funding decisions that we make kind of shape how research gets conducted across the country. And I think you see that now more than ever, as well as who benefits from the research. So today's panel is it's about how we can keep that research accessible, equitable, and focused on the public good. And we're going to be talking about a bill called SB 895, the California Science and Health Research Bond Act, which proposes a $23 billion bond for biomedical, behavioral, and climate research. It also includes access planning measures, so it really shows how collective advocacy can defend those values. I would love to introduce our incredible panelists today who can give a little bit of overview, and then we'll go into a Q&A. So whenever people have questions, we can go with that, as well as some questions I have as well. So with that, I'll introduce our incredible panelists, starting off with Patrick. So Patrick Dexter is a UAW Region 6 organizer, a UCLA Masters in Urban and Regional Planning alum, and former UAW 4811 staffer. He's coordinating the statewide campaign to pass SB 895 and navigating its full legislative path forward. Then we have Dr. Sydney Campbell. She's a postdoctoral researcher in UCLA's Biological Chemistry Department, studying pancreatic and liver cancer metabolism. With her UPenn PhD and experience as the head steward of UAW's 4811 postdoc unit, she brings the frontline perspective of early career researchers advocating for SB 895. And then we have Peter Mayroddick, who's directed Public Citizens Access to Medicines program since 2010. His team has shaped major US and global drug pricing legislation, so many of you might know him or might have seen him. He's reduced key medicine costs, influenced international trade negotiations, and advocated for health equity worldwide. So to start us off, I will hand it off to the panelists to maybe talk about the measure, give a brief overview of kind of why they feel it's important, and then we'll jump into the Q&A.
Hi, everybody. It's really an honor to be here to be able to address you at this conference today. UAW has been really inspired to learn about the work done by UAEM, Public Citizen, basically the whole access planning community. It's been sort of foundational to how we've chosen to shape some of the more social democratic provisions of SB 895. And I'll just back up for a second and do a quick introduction to UAW and the measure. But UAW is the United Auto Workers Union. And despite the name, we're actually the largest union of academic, higher education, scientific, and research workers in the country. We represent close to 150,000 researchers, largely in university settings, but also in nonprofits, research hospitals, research institutes, et cetera. And here at the University of California system, we have about close to 60,000 members in our local UAW 4811, which includes everybody from graduate research assistants to teaching assistants, all the way through postdocs, staff scientists, and now increasingly academic and support staff as well. So we are part of a growing movement of scientists and researchers who are actively seeking to shape the conditions under which science takes place in the United States. And it's hard to talk about how science takes place in the United States without also talking about the policies that come from the federal government, and in particular, the National Institute of Health. So the last year, I mean, I think the people in this room are probably pretty well aware of this, but the last year has been extremely dramatic for people whose lives depend in any way on federal funding for scientific research. the NIH is the biggest funder of science of all of the agencies that we kind of look at, but there's other big ones too, including the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy, the Department of Agriculture, NOAA, NASA, and even more beyond that. But basically, the Trump administration has sought to really like take a hatchet to the way that science funding is done in this country. And their most dramatic proposals involved multi-billion-dollar cuts to research funding agencies, many of which we are very happy to report due to advocacy from people like ourselves and likely all of you were largely rejected by Congress. Which is not by any means to say that the problems have been solved, right? The administration is extremely committed to using all of their power to change the way everything in the federal government works. Science is no exception. And so there's a lot of outstanding problems that are all resulting to fewer dollars flowing to researchers to actually do research to impact important issues like climate science or life-saving biomedical research. That includes things like shifting to smaller grant amounts, multi-year funding, censoring what kind of grants or what kind of topics are and are not allowed to be studied, and a new priority from the NIH director to achieve so-called geographic equity by redistributing money from the institutions and states that have traditionally received it and allocating more money to states and institutions that have historically received less of it. On face value, that's not actually a crazy or bad thing to suggest, but in the context of a flat budget, that amounts to a significant cut to people at universities in states like California, New York, Massachusetts that have been doing a lot of the cutting edge research that powers biomedical innovation in this country. So that brings us to SB 895, which is a proposal written by UAW and co-sponsored by the University of California, which would place a $23 billion ballot a $23 billion bond on the 2026 ballot that would fund all of the kinds of research that are at risk of being defunded by the Trump administration at California institutions. We often say, to make it simple, that it would be similar to creating a California version of the NIH. In reality, it would actually have a more broad purview than the NIH, and it would be empowered to fund things like climate and environmental and conservation science that are also very much in the target of the federal government. But just given the way money currently flows, I think by default, it will largely be a majority biomedical research funding agency. So this is a very exciting campaign. We are pursuing it via a vote of the legislature, which means that this year, within the next few months, actually, we need to get 2/3 votes in the Assembly and the Senate of California, followed by a signature from the governor. And UAW members and our allies have been hard at work laying the groundwork for that to happen. We just had our first legislative policy committee hearing, which was a huge success, really showcased the strength of the coalition we've been building for this. And we're now looking at on May 4th in Sacramento, we'll be hosting a very large rally, bringing thousands of scientists and community members and supporters to the state capitol to demand the state make serious investments in science and research. So I'll now hand it off to my colleague, Sydney, who's going to talk a little bit about her experience as a researcher, what this has all been like and why it's motivated the need for states to step up.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Patrick. I can keep it short because I think Patrick did a great job of talking about kind of the motivations behind this bill and where we're at now. So my name is Sydney. I'm a postdoctoral scholar, as was mentioned, in the Department of Biological Chemistry here. I think probably most people in this room know what a postdoc does, but just in case you're not familiar with postdocs, we're people who have done our PhD training and we're now working in the lab, trying to add something to our training or maybe explore a different area of expertise to then go on and forge our own independent research career in either by becoming a faculty or going into private industries. There's a number of ways that you can go after being a postdoc, but that's kind of what we're doing in the lab. So we're the ones in the lab doing the research, alongside, of course, our graduate students in techs, et cetera. Last August, the Trump administration froze a bunch of grants. A bunch is probably an understatement. There were millions of dollars of grants that were frozen in terms of funding coming into UCLA. One of the grants that was frozen was actually a grant that I had written studying the impacts of diet on pancreatic cancer development and how the foods that we eat may make it more or less likely that a person develops pancreatic cancer. To give you a sense of the timeline of my experiments, the shortest time point that I have in my mouse experiments is like 2 months, with most of the time looking at like 6 to 9 months. So these are pretty like long-term experiments, and any disruption in those mouse experiments can really cause like a major holdup. But I think that honestly, our lab was able to move money around to ensure that our experiments continued. A lot of my colleagues were not as lucky. I have seen, as through being a steward with UAW 4811, I know a lot about layoff situations here. And so I saw people who either their contracts were not renewed simply because their projects were not, they didn't know if the funding was going to be restored for their projects. People had to put experiments on hold because they simply didn't know if they were going to be able to continue them for the time period that was going to need to happen. And though the funding was ultimately reinstated thanks to the work of our union and others, it's really had a chilling effect on research broadly. I think that people are kind of now, I think maybe before the funding freeze happened, it was sort of like, okay, but this isn't going to happen to us, right? And then it did, and now it feels like it could happen again at any time. And so I think that that has motivated a lot of us as scientists to really like take ownership of where our funding is coming from through measures like SB 895. At least speaking for myself, that's very motivating for me. And so I think that we have a real opportunity here as scientists to now have more like sort of make the funding mechanisms that we want to see, right? Because the NIH is amazing, but there's definitely things that we can do to improve it. And through means like SB 895, we can start to kind of set the examples that we want to see in terms of funding mechanisms, especially when it comes to things like access to medicines, et cetera. So yeah, I will pass it to Peter.
Thank you. That was excellent. These are it's pretty frightening times. It's been a frightening year for researchers and academics and people who care about health, global health. And it's hard to believe that it could somehow be in the national interest to cancel already given grants on pancreatic research. I'm so sorry. But I'm glad that we're fighting back. And UAM has a pretty exciting opportunity here, actually, to drive and help organize for a major ballot initiative that could restore funding, protect funding, expand funding into new areas, and do it all while incorporating the access planning that people in this room have been responsible for developing as a concept, responsible for getting initiated here at UCLA. Huge congratulations at that. UC Berkeley, and this is an opportunity to take it statewide. So it's pretty excellent. And if anyone has a lined notebook, we should really circulate a sign-up sheet so that we can be in touch after for folks who want to help organize and work on this campaign. When UAW reached out, we were excited and saw an opportunity to bring together two major priorities in health: research funding and access. Research obviously is under attack. Access and affordability is one of the hands down most popular political initiatives across the country. Any politician now has to have an answer for how they're going to bring down drug prices. But of course, we all know from UAIM that as we approach university administrators about some of these initiatives, doing it in a way that's decoupled from research funding, we actually can encounter some resistance, right? So you put them together here and you're getting sort of the political strengths and the needs of both, and we're able to go to our universities and say, we're actually on the same side here. We're going to help generate revenue, we're going to help generate research funding, and we're going to help serve your public interest mission and get these medical tools to everyone who needs them. So it's quite the win-win. And UAW, much to its credit, has worked with us, reached out, listened, and allowed the building blocks for a coalition that picks up, I think, other kinds of health groups, those who aren't just working on the research end, but the access end to this initiative. We're so glad to be in it. So here's what we've proposed, essentially, that Patrick had asked us to sort of help pull together what would be the sort of affordability components of this. And I think you'll find it similar. We've worked with some of the same individuals. I think you'll find it similar to the access planning that UAIM's been involved in. So, and we need to work on a shorthand for this initiative. Are you guys just SB 895 publicly? Because we may So we'll call it SB 895 and like think about whether there's a, there's a nice shorthand campaign title we can use, but you're proposing the science bond. Oh, science bond is good. Science bond, I like that. Okay. Yeah, right. Okay. All right. So we workshop. Okay. So the science bond, establishing the California Foundation for Science and Health Research, which is pretty exciting. So a component of it, and you can see the legislation online, would be that before the first grant, there's a council that will develop and operationalize access provisions in consultation with experts and people who've been working in this field, and perhaps some people in this room. Grantees, if you're getting some of this money, you submit an access plan, strategies and timelines for access in the United States and in lower and middle income countries, equitable access provisions, including the open licensing initiatives that we've worked on. The foundation can push back, can help establish detailed criteria and examples like the National Institutes of Health has. So there's this ability to have a dialogue about access as the plans develop. There's a proposal to have California access the Medicaid price, which is a 23.1% rebate from the average manufacturer price for a new medical tool. So if this leads to a medicine or a vaccine, California would get the same price as Medicaid, which is the best price at the federal level. There are provisions for open science, putting the research inputs into the public domain, publications, samples, and otherwise. And also provisions on pandemic preparedness that could be triggered in the event of a public health emergency to help ensure access. The foundation would also retain rights to license where necessary the technologies in order to help expand access. So this is access planning, much like you were able to achieve here at UCLA, and we have the opportunity to take it statewide. Californians benefit for the tax contribution that they've put in, but so does everybody else. It's also, some of the advantages of access planning generally, you'll hear later, like on our lenacapavir panel, how hard a fight it can be once a medical tool is already on market to take industry to task and to try and legislate and negotiate prices. It's challenging, right? UAM is moving upstream, and so are many other players in the world of sort of medical affordability. Upstream meaning earlier in the life cycle of a product, upstream to research. And we're not the only ones that like this. If you talk to sort of third-party observers, they'll sort of say, well, you're taking public money. It's fair. You're on notice from the beginning that there will be some conditionalities to the public benefit that you're receiving. And since you're on notice from the beginning, that creates an opportunity to plan, to have business plans and projecting the future. You're not getting surprised by like government taking something away or whatever. It's part of the benefit, part of the business planning from the beginning. And of course, it's a level playing field. Everyone who's participating in this ecosystem has some of the same rules applied to them. So it's built on UAM's work, so let's build support for it. Here in California, we can think about organizing and campaigning for it, but also for your universities, wherever you're from. This is relevant beyond California because it's going to show further support for access planning and its momentum, right? Everyone in this room will be able to point to the science bond, point to the science bond and say, oh, look at what California is doing. And it'll be another example of how access planning is spreading, and also evidence for how research funding and access planning can work together, both politically and practically. Word about that. We'll talk about this more later too, but I'm not sure if everyone in this room appreciates everything that you've accomplished with access planning in recent years. This sort of idea that Universities Allied for Essential Medicines has championed is now one of the quickest spreading ways of thinking about access to medicines worldwide. It is in the World Health Organization's pandemic agreement, Article 9.5. It is now policy at the National Institutes of Health, the world's leading funder of biomedical research. The Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, CEPI, major vaccine funder during COVID, they are not only updating constantly their access planning policies, but they're really pushing other funders like Wellcome and Gates to do more of the same. So this is, we're part of something successful that is growing and has even survived the Trump administration's push, because the NIH policy, while it was first developed under Biden, is very much the Trump White House, as we understand it, has signed off on it. The Office of Management and Budget is perfectly aware of the NIH access planning policy, and it's bipartisan. It's moving forward in actuality now. So I think we're really onto something here. But it's also an opportunity, of course, to make alliances with people who are working to restore research funding. And in addition to UAW and their campaign here, we're happy to connect you to some of the other national groups that are working on this, like the Defend Public Health campaign, that is more than 1,000 academic researchers that are working actively on the federal politics of the research funding cuts day by day. And we think that that is a powerful alliance. And of course, is especially well situated for it, because we always have built in the academic research community of, by, and for it. And as we work to sort of improve the public interest, vision, and application of those inventions, now we have this chance to really work also to support the community itself that's doing that incredible research. So, thanks.
Hi. Okay. So awesome. Thank you so much for those great intros to kind of the bill, why the work matters, and all of that. I just wanted to take a quick step back of, I guess each of you are in very unique roles and very different from each other. I wanted to ask why this matters to you, why public funding is important, why access planning is important, what even are these things, and how they impact, I guess, the institution, researchers, all of that.
Sure. So there's a few different ways I could try to answer this question, but I think, from my perspective, I'm not a scientist by training, but I was training at one point to be an urban planner, and my area of expertise was regional economic development. And one of the things that was most interesting to me to learn about in that field was the ways that the California's high-tech, high-wage economy has been enabled by decades of funding for science and research at California universities. And that's really what makes the state what it is and why it has such a competitive edge over other states. And so, flash forward several years later, working at UAW on a different variety of projects, and all of this stuff started happening at the National Institutes of Health. And I sort of immediately saw how threatening this was, not just to our immediate workers, but how this was actually really sort of tearing out the foundations of what makes the whole University of California, and thus the state of California, really work the way it does. And so I was really motivated to work on this for that reason. First we were doing federal advocacy, and then second we're now doing the bond campaign. And it was actually only 6 months into doing that did I recall the fact that 5 years ago, when my mom was diagnosed with cancer, she had stage 3 lung cancer, which is a diagnosis that if she had gotten it 7 or 10 years ago would have had a 50+% mortality rate. But she had access to a state-of-the-art treatment that was developed with National Institutes of Health funding, and with minimal surgery and actually in many ways minimal treatment, made a complete recovery within a year. And so just to think that that's the kind of technology and research that's being threatened by the federal government right now is just that's just so insane. And it's highly motivating, I think, for anyone who has a connection to the issue like that to think it's really necessary to do whatever we can to fight back.
We can, yeah, we got this one. I think my reasons are definitely similar. So I've spent my whole career, my scientific career, working in universities that have received public funding from the NIH, and the type of research that I do and that a lot of my colleagues do is really best suited to be done using public funds. And what do I mean by that? I think that when the funding freezes happened, and even since the funding freezes have happened, there's sort of this sentiment of well, why doesn't private industry just step up and fund science in America? Why doesn't this just become private? And the reality is that private industry is not set up to do the kind of science that we need to reach true innovations like the ones that Patrick was describing. So it's to really like revolutionize things like cancer treatment. And I speak to cancer treatment because that's what I'm an expert in, but a lot of my colleagues work in like HIV research and infectious disease and all kinds of other things that, so I guess to make a specific example is that my research really focuses on why do people get cancer at all and how can we prevent cancer. That's not really like a profitable research strategy, if that makes sense. Like it's not necessarily, my goal is to improve cancer treatment by better understanding the early stages of the disease and not necessarily to make some type of therapy that's going to cure the sickest patients right now and make a ton of money for a company. But I think that my type of research is very important to ensure that cancer patients in the future maybe don't have to undergo the types of treatments that people have to undergo right now, which can be very difficult and toxic to their systems. And so to me, it's really important for innovation of medicine that public funding for research continues because it's for the good of the people, right? We want to keep making medical advances that are actually improving people's lives. And so we really need funding to come from like multiple arms, and we need to keep the ecosystem healthy so that we can continue to do this type of work.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing. I wanted to kind of open up the floor to questions. Whenever people have questions, I'll run the mic over to them. If they don't, I have some questions here. So we'll move this along. I think we'll start off with Grace and then we'll move over there.
I just want to say thank you very much for being here. It's such an honor to be in a room with such educated individuals and sharing this opportunity with you guys. So thank you very much. Just from a Canadian perspective and from a student's perspective as well, I think we see a lot of misinformation about research in the news and misunderstandings from the public. How does this affect your daily life as a researcher and a scientist? And how can we as aspiring researchers prevent this, talking about our access planning and defunding and making sure that everybody has the proper resources to understand the medications that they're accessing?
Okay, I can go first. Well, since you asked about researchers, yeah, no, this is a great question, and this is something that actually we talk about in the lab all the time. I think that you make a really great point that there is a lot of misinformation and honestly just lack of information about like, what is it I do all day? You know what I mean? So I think that in terms of like combating that, I think that there's a few, this kind of gets into science communications. I think that there's several really good examples. Like I think the story of how GLP-1s were discovered, that came from a really basic discovery, and I believe it's a rodent of some kind, and I'm not remembering it specifically, but Google it. It's a really cool story. Or no, it was Gila monsters, sorry. But it was a really, really, really basic research discovery that led to GLP-1s, which like everybody is taking now. But if we hadn't funded that basic science research, like we wouldn't have gotten there. Same thing with CRISPR. I think a lot of people have heard about gene editing technology that has the potential to like really change people's lives. That was discovered in worms, you know, like that wasn't necessarily something where people, I think people had the long vision that this could one day be a medicine, but when people were studying the actual gene editing systems, they didn't necessarily, that wasn't necessarily their goal, right? They just wanted to understand the biology, and understanding this biology is what really like led to these medicines today. So I think like sharing those stories with people is one strategy that's really helpful. I think that another thing is that we've talked about as scientists is just the importance of talking to everyday people about just like what it is you do. So even you guys in this room, like, what are you studying in school? What are your goals? Like, what are you, I don't know if everyone in this room is a student, but if you are, you know, if you have a job in medicine or STEM, just kind of talking about your day-to-day life. I know I try to do that with my friends who are not scientists, because I think it sort of humanizes it a lot more, and it makes people see that it's like this is a job. Like, it's like, yes, we're doing science and that's, you know, some abstract thing, but at the end of the day, it's people doing it. And it also makes it more accessible and helps to increase like diversity in STEM and like that kind of thing. So I think that that is also really important. So those are the kinds of things that I think we can do to combat that, but I'm sure my colleagues have some ideas as well.
Yeah, I would just add, on the one hand, I mean, misunderstanding and mistrust of science is definitely a problem in the United States. On the other hand, it's less pronounced in California, and California remains a place where people are committed to things like research and vaccines. That being said, pharmaceutical companies are an extremely unpopular entity on both sides of the partisan spectrum. And so for a measure like SB 895, it's necessary to be able to talk to people about the ways that this is going to return direct value to their lives, and that it's not just going to be public investment in something that then is profited off of by pharmaceutical companies. And so things like access planning and recoupment matter in a very political sense in that regard, because they're a really important part of how public support for increased funding research can take place, because people don't necessarily understand the ways that the benefits of these things can return to them.
Okay, great. I think there's a question in the back and then a question in chat, and then I'll get to you.
Hello, my name's Dane. I do not have a background in science. I'm a historian by background, and I'm currently studying for my Master of Library Information Studies. So we're also experiencing our own difficulties with funding. So I can't really speak to the scientific side of things, but as far as I'm aware, a lot of the system that we have for high-end research in California and across the country depends on a fairly steady stream of funding at the federal level that has been mostly untouched for most of the past 80 years in the post-war world. What happens if that changes? What happens if federal funding for the sciences does become increasingly politicized, and we have to start thinking about funding on a 8-year, perhaps even 4-year, maybe even 2-year cycle, where it just gets turned on and off again, depending on who is in charge in Congress and the White House? Do you think it is likely that we will have to prepare for that? And if it is likely, what can we do to prepare for it?
I just have a simple answer, which is, I mean, I think that the science bond is kind of designed to mitigate against that to a degree, right? It's a recognition that the federal landscape for funding is hostile and difficult, and it's one of several examples where states are saying we're going to have to take more responsibility to ensure continuity of the state institutions, the public research, the science agenda that we care about. And of course, California is actively being a leader in several of those discussions. But $23 billion set up to drive California research is going to, I would think, go a long way toward sort of mitigating the tumult that we're seeing from NIH right now. But of course, it's a larger question than that, and I don't have an overarching answer, except to say that of course it's something that many of us are very worried about, and there are projects. Maybe this, I mean, for the Trump administration has been a shock to the system across the board, and there are many people who are trying to rethink how to establish balances, frankly, in our view, when some degree of normalcy returns to our government, assuming we can make that happen. And so that includes provisions. I think there are sort of legislative proposals, and there even has been since the initial cuts, I believe, some internal proposals put forward that would try and not have grants cut midstream and other initiatives like that. So I'm not like quite sharp on the details, but I know that effort is underway. And I guess the other assurance that I can provide is just that those first months of the administration were extreme even to some of its partisans. And so while the project of sort of dismantling continues broadly, there is also sort of quiet internal pushback of trying to reset of the how deep that disruption goes. There are voices that don't want it to go quite that far and sort of recognize that that kind of chaos is more broadly destructive than intended. But we all obviously just have our work to do to show up.
Yeah. Sorry, Patrick asked if I want to say something about the consequences. I can, and which is any disruption in federal funding for research will be devastating. And I think folks in this room know that, but and I think that that's a challenging message to convey to people, especially people that like haven't, you know, ever been in a lab or like, you know, understand how these experiments work. But I don't think you need like a technical understanding of science to understand that these experiments take a long time. And if you disrupt a long-term experiment, then you're losing money on the thing that you've already invested a bunch of money into, right? I think that preparing for like 2-year, 4-year, 8-year grants is an interesting idea and is something to think about, but I think would be challenging from like a budget perspective and whatever. We don't have to get into that. But I think, I guess like as I see it, we just need, I think as scientists, we can be better advocates for ourselves. And I think that's a conversation that's actually happening in scientific communities now. I mean, as a historian, like I think that scientists can do a better job of like learning the history of the NIH and learning the history of how we got to this point. You know, a lot of people don't even know who Vannevar Bush is. Like, it's like that's something where we could learn more about how we got to this point, and sort of, I think by learning our history, we can then better understand what we need to do going forward. I also think kind of like what I was talking about earlier, like taking ownership of these systems. Right now, it's you know, I don't think that we don't appreciate the funding that we receive from the NIH. I think we're extremely grateful for it. But I think that, you know, we should advocate more for the system itself, and also sort of, if we think that there are changes that need to be made, sort of advocate for those changes on a larger scale than maybe what we're currently doing now. Yeah.
I can't believe you didn't say people are going to leave science and the country altogether. Yeah, I literally New York Times headline this morning: Trump slashed science funding. Now the U.S. could face a costly brain drain. Like, that's the kind of consequence that could easily come from this. But as far as what can be done about it, like in addition to the kinds of state level measures that we're talking about, right? Like support for, despite the crazy polarization of the country that we live in, support for scientific research is actually popular with a majority of Republicans and Democrats. And the last year of advocacy around the federal budget really showed that, because with a Republican trifecta, we were able to largely preserve at least the dollar amounts for federal funding for most kinds of science, with the exception of some very specific forms of space exploration. And there are people like, you know, I mean, Tom Tillis, the senator from North Carolina, is unfortunately now retiring, but he is a Republican champion for science funding. And there are people like Katie Britt, the senator from Alabama, who is in all senses kind of like a MAGA wacko, but was really willing to work hard behind the scenes to make sure that the systems that fund the University of Alabama, which are the same systems that fund the University of California, don't get totally screwed up. So despite partisan polarization, I think it's important to remember that the American public wants investment in treatments to life-saving diseases, and that's actually an issue that can bring people together in broad coalitions across the country.
Sorry, just to add one thing that I thought of while you were talking, because I think from listening to Peter and Patrick talk, as a scientist, I don't always think about like institutions as much as like what individual scientists are doing. But I think a key difference between responding as a scientist in the first Trump administration versus the second Trump administration, because actually in the first Trump administration, there was a proposed cut to the NIH as well. And that was when I was at Penn and I was a graduate student. And we were able to respond like as a department, but I wasn't part of a union at Penn of scientists. They're unionized now. Shout out to UAW. But now being in the UC system and being part of a union, I was really impressed at the speed at which, because we were organized, the speed at which we were able to respond to these funding cuts and have like a real mechanism through which we could kind of activate and take action. And so I really genuinely think that like unionization for scientists is really important to the future of science in America. So that's my soapbox.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. I think there's one question in the chat.
Yes, I will read this from the Zoom chat because we do have a few people joining virtually. It says, "Hi, my name is Jack Fang, currently a third-year doctoral student in epidemiology at UCLA and a proud member of UAW 4811. My question is, ultimately, the success of SB 895 falls on the will of the voters. How can we best educate and mobilize for the public about the bond to make sure it can get through? Thank you."
That one was like geared for me. I think there's like two main parts of this question. There's how do we make sure the bond gets on the ballot, and then how do we pass the bond? And in the first stage of that, which is where we are now, which is how do we make sure the bond gets on the ballot, people should talk to their elected state assembly people and state senators about the importance of this issue. They should also really talk to people at any level of elected office, because all of these people have like mutual influence over each other, even if it's somewhat informal. But people should also just like publicly tell their stories and like share the information with everybody in your network about what you do, why it's important, and what will the consequences of it stopping be. And then when we are able to clear the threshold of the governor's signature, then the audience for that message is no longer the legislature; it's the public. And I can say from some experiences working on this campaign, including bringing scientists to the California Democratic Party convention and bringing scientists to the recent No Kings protests to talk to people about the bond. People love it. People love hearing from a scientist about the research that they do and the way that is impactful to the world. And they love seeing, everybody hates that science is being defunded. And so people are really empowered when they see people who are actually stepping up to fight back. So I would say like being involved in the political process and sharing the story of the work that you do with your community is the most important thing that you can do.
Okay, great. I think there's.
Wait, let me add one thing, which is that we actually have an online petition that we're asking people to sign that maybe we can share the link for with conference attendees later, but that would be a great thing to sign and circulate the petition amongst your networks.
Yeah, and I want to shout out that QR code one more time on the screen. You can sign up to get more information later. We'll pass the list along.
Might also just suggest at this point in the discussion that in addition to questions, if folks have ideas, proposals that you want to throw, it's a workshop, right? We should do that too.
Yeah, and if there's anything that was brought up that's confusing too, please feel free to ask about it. I know a lot of you may be newer UAM students. Maybe you don't know about all the access planning work that we've done. Maybe you don't know how that integrates into public funding. So feel free to ask about that.
Hi, my name is Zoe Elizabeth, and I'm here with UAM UCSC. So really exciting to be here. One of the questions I have, semi-related to this specific conversation, how do we kind of encourage people to participate? UCSC is not as large in the pharmaceutical space. A big gap we have when talking to professors and researchers is an anxiety that signing up for these kind of things, paying attention to these initiatives will limit their ability for future endeavors when they already feel that they are kind of unable to do so because of current systems. And like a real fear that if they participate, they will suffer more than if they can, enact change by participating. And we've had a really hard time connecting with really established professors and researchers on this kind of thing. And I wonder if you guys have any advice for talking to these people and convincing them, especially as undergraduates where we don't have that direct experience and like have a hard time talking to them on their level. So if you guys have any advice, we would really appreciate it.
Well, if I follow, you're probably talking about sort of the UAM end of this spectrum, like access planning and
Yeah, the
and
affordable
technology
access
licensing,
plan.
where it's the question's a little different than for something like the science bond, because there what we're saying is go forward and talk publicly about something that the university might be concerned actually hurts its bottom line, even though it's very good for the world in terms of promoting access to the technologies that you're developing. One of the nice advantages we have about Science Bond, including for sort of UAM campaigning or whatever we decide to do, is it really puts the two together so that you're talking about a big net bump for something that the biggest proposal I imagine there is anywhere to sort of really advance research and bring income in. And then as a part of that, there's a public responsibility to ensure access, where California also would get a very good price in addition to the world. So, I think the benefits are sort of built in across the board, where we shouldn't have that same challenge with this one.
I guess like, I don't know if this speaks to specifically about access planning, but I just since you mentioned like talking to faculty and like talking to established faculty and stuff, I guess I just wanted to encourage you to keep doing it, because even if you feel like it's sort of like a chip away, you gotta chip away at them. And even if you feel like you can't talk to them on their level, like your viewpoint is really important. And so I just wanted to encourage you to keep going, even if it feels hard or stressful. But Patrick has.
Yeah, I would just add obligatory union organizing talking point. But if people don't want to, stick their necks out on an issue, that happens all the time when you're trying to form a union. And if everybody does it together, then there's no risk to the individual, because we have the collective backing of all of our peers and coworkers behind us.
Thank you. I think there was a question. Okay, perfect. Hi, my name is Sunlin. I'm a fourth year computational biology student here at UCLA. And I feel like this is maybe less of a question than a discussion point. I was just kind of wondering what your thoughts were on, you mentioned a brain drain in science in the United States, and I think that the work you're doing is absolutely amazing. It's really good advocacy within California, and I know that other states are doing this kind of similarly as well. But I'm wondering, in this like current time, it takes time for this advocacy to generate traction. And as somebody who's like looking to do a PhD and stuff like that, I know that there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of like rotations, in terms of placements, in terms of funding for people who are hoping to go into science. And I'm wondering kind of what you think about the likelihood of this brain drain, whether or not you see it's actually happening in your field already, or what you think about that. Think about the turnaround time that's happening in these efforts to advocate for better funding, as opposed to some other countries who don't have this as an issue. They don't need scientists to be now thinking about all of this, which is also taking time away, in my opinion, from doing things like cancer research. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I hear what you're saying. So I think that, first of all, I just want to like validate everything that you're feeling. It is a really stressful time to be applying to graduate programs. I train undergrads. I know what it's like to have to go through that process right now. And I hear everything that you're saying. I think that maybe my colleagues here feel differently about like predicting turnaround times and that kind of thing. But I think, speaking as a scientist, I sort of am of the opinion that we can't necessarily know exactly what's going to happen. I think this year has taught me more than ever before that like we can't necessarily predict the future, right? Well, we can't. I don't know why I said necessarily. We cannot predict the future. And so I think that kind of centering yourself on your goals and sort of looking at what opportunities are best for you at a given time are kind of like how you have to approach the problem, and just kind of keep going as long as it's still your goal. That being said, as far as like, is the brain drain happening now? I think I don't have the numbers on that. I don't know if you guys, no, I don't think we have numbers as far as like, is it happening? But I do know that people are definitely considering like other places. And I think that, that there's other countries that do great science. That's always been true. And so if other countries choose to, have more centralized funding for their research in a way that's more similar to the NIH, like people will leave. But I think that kind of the converse of that is if we are successful in pushing the science bill forward and do this in California, people will come to California. Like there's going to be people from all over the country that will leave to come to California, especially if like things keep happening at the NIH, which I think is like a huge selling point of this bill that maybe people don't realize because like they haven't been in a situation where they're receiving science funding that has been lost. You know what I mean? So I think that the reality is like sort of, and like Patrick and I have talked about this, but it's like the effects of these funding freezes are definitely more complicated than it's like, oh, now everyone leaves or now everyone comes. I think that it's sort of taking it one step at a time and then making decisions based on that. But I guess, sorry, and I'll after I say this, but I think that folks who are motivated to do, a lot of people who are motivated to do biomedical and medical research, like we're motivated by an idea that like this is going to make people's lives better, right? Like, and so I think that keeping that motivation and just going towards the goal, it's like we have to just keep going. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Just sort of piggybacking off of that question, coming from Canada, we're from London, Ontario, Western University. Like you had mentioned earlier, we don't really face these budget cuts at our university. We have a lot of partnerships with our local hospitals and even local companies. Obviously, UAM is an amazing opportunity for us all to work together and really bridge this gap. And obviously, we see a lot of conflict between these countries right now. What are some alternative ways that we can maybe provide this teamwork and enforce more teamwork and encourage more teamwork instead of, you know, avoiding, look, we can avoid more exploitation and quote unquote stealing of other people's research in terms of like university partnerships and providing resources and more materials. Do you think there are any alternate ways that us as a global community can help each other out in hard times of defunding like this?
Yeah, I mean, there are some sort of like macro structures like conflict between the United States and other countries that are going to be hard to deal with on an individual basis. But I think like being part of networks that bring individuals together and build solidarity across political lines is extremely important. And so whether that's via UAEM, whether it's via a labor union or some sort of other international professional society, I think that building connections with people in other places is one of the more immediate things that can be done about that, even if it doesn't necessarily have the short-term power to affect some of the structures that govern us.
Well, I think that sort of to your point about, yeah, well, how do I want to say this? I think that scientists on an individual level, I can't not speak to all scientists, but most scientists are pretty individually very collaborative. And so I do think that there's a sense of like, at least that I feel of like, we all need to get through this together because the NIH does fund like a lot of labs that collaborate with labs in other countries too. And so I do think that there is some shared sense of that. As far as like, can we build on those, you know, that feeling from like a policy perspective? I'm not sure we're gonna be able to do that, but that's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought about that, to be honest, until you asked that. Yeah.
I mean, one unfortunate truth that is revealed by all this is that the world still is a little too dependent on the United States. And we very much need other governments to step up. And so, and you know, universities and partnerships here in, you know, Canada is taking some steps forward. It could take more. You know, if countries are troubled by what they see in the U.S., and responsibility really falls to them to step into the breach. So there's really, I'm sorry to say it, but there's a huge burden on people outside the United States too, to figure out how we're all going to take ownership of this crisis and start to build up different structures, you know, which we'll talk about in the London Cap Fair session in a little while too. I don't want to put too much stock in this, but some of what you're talking about is happening, and you know, through, I mean, UDC foundations stepping forward and big up in commitment from Gates and, you know, Wellcome and others. And also you have, the ongoing WHO pandemic agreement negotiation, where you can, that's sort of like both like a possible point of hope and cynicism, depending on who you talk to. But I mean, there are bargains being struck out of the long tail of COVID inequity to create a more just world, including on these issues like pathogen access and benefit sharing, where we all put in and we all get something back. And that it's certainly a structure for a more fair world, and we can also seek to support that, which I think California is also doing, through its statements about separately being a part of WHO networks, whatever the United States does. So those are things that we can shore up.
Any other? Oh, okay.
Hello, my name is Asa. I'm also here with UCSC's UAM chapter. I wanted to ask if you have any ideas or advice around how we can take advantage of and leverage our position as students to fight to expand our university's funding to areas of research that are essential, but maybe less profitable, such as biomedical research that will eventually take form in preventative care over a really profitable cure, as you were touching on. But if you have any ideas.
I think I would really highly encourage people who are students to participate in the political process in whatever means are available to you. And I would share an anecdote from UAW, which is that in the past, in the Proposition 50 election, we had a grant from the State Federation of Labor to run a canvassing program with undergraduate students at UC San Diego and UC Irvine. And the data from the program after we did it, we had students standing on the quad talking to their peers about the importance of voting. And the post-election data showed that in the precincts where we had people doing that, the participation increased by 250% relative to the previous election. So there's a ton of untapped potential for students to be a force in electoral politics that are actually actively shaping these kinds of things.
And I think on the piggybacking off of that, supporting the science bill, it's SB 895, is a huge way to do the things you're saying, because I think that this, again, it's going to really help or allow us to shape the kind of scientific research that we want to do in California, because we're going to also be part of the process of deciding what we want to fund and that kind of thing. And so I think that advocating for this bill is a really good way to do that.
By the way, did that sign up sheet make its way around? No.
Oh,
It's via the, okay, great. Gotcha. Sorry. How old fashioned of me. Sorry. Well, this is of course an age old UAM question, and I suspect that there are people in the room who might answer it better than I do. But since I have the mic, I guess I'd just also offer, I don't know if this is still true in the literature, but for a long time it was the case of technology transfer offices, we're still tended to be a net loss in revenue, and they're all sort of working, expecting a big payday. It almost starts to feel like a lottery ticket kind of thing after a while. So, I mean, there's some reality check is necessary on that for the offices. And it's not, universities don't work only on licensing revenue or big commercial successes. They're obviously working very significantly on grants where research priorities are informed by, hopefully still, by sort of other priorities and other metrics, and Science Bond intends to go that way very significantly, putting public health priorities at the top of a funding pool. There also are measurements beyond income that universities value when it comes to publications or dominating a field, making use of the university's best resources. When I was a law student when the Artemisinin deal was announced at UC Berkeley, and there are areas where a university can, there are different currencies, right? One is cash, but another is prestige. And if you can announce significant research. That's very valuable to the university as well. And when you can talk about the public good you're going to do, if you've got a neglected tropical disease and nobody's doing the research and the university makes a significant contribution, that's cachet, and that reinforces the university's public mission and image of serving the public good. So that's good for the universities as well.
All right. Yeah, so I just wanted to, I think we'll have to wrap it up now for lunch, but I just wanted to thank our presenters for taking the time to discuss this very important topic and for everyone taking the time out of their day to come listen to this. So yeah, outside in the lobby will be some food available, and then at the Court of Sciences, a bit up the stairs, there are some tables for lunch. But yeah, that's it. Thank you all so much for coming.
Sorry, just one more comment we got from online.